I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
The one thing that made me decide that this was just how my life was going to be was in 7th grade, I went to my band teacher. I was like, this thing that's happening to me, I don't think it's right. He's touching me. I don't like it, but I don't know how to stop. Can you help me? This teacher, this breaks my heart when I think about it, but he said, what you let happen to God's temple is your fault. You need to pray and repent.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 116 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob and I interview Marie Kent, an ex-Christian who recently took over the My Book of Mormon podcast from David Michael. Marie is a computer programmer by day and a nerd by night. She was raised Baptist and left Christianity, but like many, she finds religion fascinating. She wonders how it is that so many people believe they've found the right God, yet that version of God changes so drastically. Many people who were never religious, like David Michael, the founder of the podcast that Marie now co-hosts, were driven by their curiosity to read the sacred texts of religions in hopes of understanding why so many people have given their lives to this. He decided to read the entire Book of Mormon on the air, word for word, with commentary. Perhaps we can all see in a few passages some truths that people could latch onto, and also discover passages so inane at best, or morally repugnant at worst, that they merit outright rejection. Having been a Christian the first 39 years of my life, and well familiar with the entire Bible, I have no interest whatsoever in reading it again, or even other religious texts. I'm done. It's like I ate bananas every day for 39 years, and I have no desire to have another. And yet I respect those who set out to do so. David Michael obviously wasn't alone in his curiosity. His podcast and others, including one of the most popular atheist podcasts, The Scathing Atheist, have read and or summarized the Bible and the Quran chapter by chapter, and even though I always lose interest during those portions of the show, those shows generate huge numbers of listeners. So it's obviously meeting a need. I understand the curiosity of those who desire to read these texts for themselves, and I'm glad these podcasts exist to serve those curiosities. It is truly fascinating that some people can read these sacred texts and see God and have a heartwarming experience, life-changing, life-altering epiphanies, and others can read those same texts and feel embarrassed at how morally repulsive they are. Our guest today, Marie Kent, works in the same office as our guest on episode 108, Marie Lepage, which was a great episode. This week's Marie is a pastor's kid from Minneapolis. Marie underwent sexual abuse from a boy in the youth group from 6th grade to 11th grade, right under the nose of the church. And like so often happens, there were opportunities along the way for ethical adults to intervene, rescue Marie, and stop the predator. But they chose to protect themselves, the perpetrator, and the status quo, leaving Marie to bear it alone. We taped this conversation on August 28, 2016. If you're liking our show, please subscribe to it. Give it 5 stars and or leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily on a per-episode basis through our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/EA Podcast. Or you can leave a donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music is by Sam Mayer, recorded on a handpan in the New York subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. So where are you calling from, or where are we talking to you at?
So I live in Minneapolis.
Okay,
cool.
That's a cool town, I hear.
It
is
a
very artsy
great town.
Oh, yeah.
Really
yeah,
cool.
I actually live in the Arts District.
Okay.
Which is, I think, possibly the best part of anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Not that I'm biased or anything.
No, of course not. I grew up in, I did a lot of my graduate work in Wisconsin, and I consider that now my hometown in Madison. So it's a lot like Madison.
So nice.
Yeah.
It is a lot like Madison.
It really is.
I think I saw on your profile, or not your profile, but the email exchanges that you and I had, that you live within walking distance of 4 brew pubs or something.
Actually, I was wrong. I live within walking distance of 5 brew pubs and a distillery.
All right.
Yeah, and also 4 playgrounds, and if you ever look at a map of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and there's the freeway that makes this big ring all the way around it, because every metropolitan center has that. Mm-hmm. If you look right in the absolute middle of it, like in the middle of that circle, that's where I am.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah.
Bullseye.
Absolute bullseye. And so part of why I love this part of town is that it's full of art, and it's full of shows and music, and you pretty much have to hide in your basement to avoid meeting wonderful people and culture.
That's right. You ever see a Garrison Keillor walking down the street?
I haven't, no, but I did live nearby where he had a house in the middle of nowhere at one point. So really? I have seen Garrison Keillor multiple times, but only on stage.
Okay. Yeah. Me too, strangely enough. But
You've seen
him?
Yeah.
You went to a live taping?
Yeah, a couple, 3 of them, I bet. Maybe 4. I don't
Seriously?
know. Yeah. He's good. He's fun to watch.
Well, speaking of playgrounds, how many kids do you have?
I have 2 little boys.
Okay.
Really? How old?
Well, my oldest, he is about to turn 4, but he would, the way he acts, you'd think he's 35, like me. Because he has opinions, and boy, does he know how the world works. And I'm like, I love you, child, but you got to put pants on before we go outside.
Sounds like my wife.
Yeah. So my oldest is almost 4, and my youngest just turned 1.
Okay.
As of yesterday, he can now pull himself up to stand all by himself without anybody helping him. So it's a very big deal around here.
It is, yeah.
Well, you can tell you love your kids. That's great.
I do, yeah. I never really thought that I would have 2 kids. I was like, maybe someday I'll have 1. Yeah, it'll be great. And now that I have 2, I'm like, this is the best. You are so much work, but this is the best.
Yeah. So you're thinking about more?
No, emphatically not.
Yeah, that's a lot of work and a lot of money to.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Something like $200,000 or something like that.
Well, so right now in Minneapolis, the cost of daycare in Minneapolis is one of the highest in the country. So it actually costs more to send your child to an infant program than to send them to a year of college at the U.
My gosh.
And there are no scholarships. There is nothing. So fortunately, their dad and I both have fairly decent paying jobs. Mm-hmm. So we can send both of the kids to all-day daycare at a Montessori school with preschool. So it's actually that the center is age 6 weeks through kindergarten. And so I looked at that and was like, oh, you mean our children can stay at the same place for 4 years? Yes, please.
Yeah. So kids love that kind of structure too.
Oh, they totally do. Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah. But I'm very lucky that way, is their dad and I are, that we can afford to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what we'd do.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Are you married still, or are you divorced?
No, we're divorced. Mm-hmm. Whenever anybody finds out that I have a 1-year-old and I'm divorced from their dad, the first thing they think is that they have different fathers, which is not at all the case. No. No.
I see.
No, we actually had a fairly amicable divorce, as divorces go. That I actually started divorce proceedings while I was on maternity leave. our lives took a hard right turn, and we basically realized that we're good co-parents, but we aren't good like partners living together.
Was it because of religion by any chance, or was it something else?
No, it was basically it was just fundamentally different approaches towards life, like our life goals. Because we'd been together a while before we got married and before we started having kids, and once we had kids, it changed us both in ways that we weren't expecting. And then when I got pregnant with our second, we're like, okay, we're going to do this. We can do this. We can figure it out. And then we're like, oh, we can't figure this out.
Wow.
Irreconcilable differences.
Yeah. Like we had the textbook case of irreconcilable differences, but we are good parents. Like we have, so yes, we did. Oh my God, we're getting divorced in the middle of having a baby. But since then, our oldest, the almost 4-year-old, like we've diagnosed, gosh, I think 3 food allergies and an esophagus problem since we separated. There have been, he also ran into 2 coffee tables and had to go to the emergency room for stitches. And our youngest had a really bad cold and was hospitalized for 3 days in February. So like we've had a lot going on.
Yeah, sounds like.
And their dad and I were fine. Like we email all the time. We were actually texting last night about a possible red dye food allergy for our oldest, and so we're not together. We're not married, but we will always be parents. And I think we're doing a really good job about it.
Well, that's good. Excellent. Absolutely. So you say you have a really good job. Is this the podcast? That can't be it. I know that for a fact.
You're a
not at all.
data analyst.
Yes, I am a data analyst. Yeah, so right now my hobby is I do the My Book of Mormon podcast, which, I mean, we'll discuss in a minute. But for right now, for me, for my day job, do you remember Marie Lepage from last month?
Yes.
Yes, so she is the executive assistant in the same department that I work at a health insurance company.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Two Maries, too.
And I think we're the only Maries in the company, and we sit like 2 desks away. So right now we're both doing podcasts, and so we're gonna get together.
I remember now. That's when you reached out to me. You were friends with Marie, and you were jealous that she'd got to come on our show.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. Well, because I came to work, and we're like talking and catching up, and everything's great. And I was, of course, going on and on about math and insurance policy because I'm a nerd and I love it. And she's like, I don't even know who you are. I was like, we're good. And she said, oh, by the way, I recorded this podcast and I really think you'd like it. And I was like, of course I would. So when I listened to it, I really liked the idea of discussing religion in the context, not of, I believe this, but I sort of used to believe this and now I don't, and here is how it's affected my life.
Sure. Yeah, that's our premise right there.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But are you or were you a Mormon?
No, I have no connection to Mormonism whatsoever.
And you do the Mormon podcast.
I do. So here's the story of what happened.
And neither did David. He wasn't a Mormon either, right?
No, not at all. No, so David Michael started the podcast because he basically got the idea that if he could read the religious texts of a religion, he should be able to figure out what that religion is. Which, from the surface, sounds like, yeah, that's totally reasonable, but that is not how it panned out at all. So I started listening just completely accidentally shortly after he started the podcast. A friend of mine knew that I was kind of interested in religion and history. And at the time, I was training for a marathon, which is a lot of time on the road. And I just needed every podcast ever to listen to because I was so bored, because running is phenomenally boring, everyone. Oh, my gosh. And so I was just binge listening through all that. But then through the course of listening to the entire Book of Mormon and then the Pearl of Great Price and then the Book of Abraham, I picked up a lot of just Mormon buzzwords along the way. And so I started listening to John DeLynne's podcast, Mormon Stories. And so I was just listening to that. And then I started noticing just Mormonism in the news. And so I just became fascinated by this religion that was so similar to what I grew up in, because I grew up Baptist. But it wasn't Baptist. But it was still a group of people believing this is the one true church. This is how God is. And I was like, well, that's not what I was taught, but I was told the exact same thing. What is going on here? And I loved it, and it was fascinating. And then I think it was May of 2016, David Michael got a promotion at work. And so he just put up a little announcement on the podcast feed saying, hey, I got a promotion at work. I don't have time to do this anymore. Would anybody like it? So there I am at work on a Monday morning listening to my favorite podcast, and all it is like 10 minutes of him saying it's not going to happen anymore. And so I basically quit my morning reports that I was supposed to be working on, and I emailed him and was like, I need to take over your podcast, and here's why. And I sent this bullet pointed list of how I would be perfect for the show, in part because I'm not Mormon, but everything I know is what he read, which is kind of the premise of the show.
Right.
And also, I'm fun to talk to, I'd like to think. And so he's like, hey, Bryce, because Bryce Blankenagel is the co-host now, sort of. Like, it's not his show, but he used to be a true believing Mormon, and then he left the church. So they were reading the Doctrines and Covenants together. And so David Michael got me in touch with Bryce. Bryce and I talked on the phone for like half an hour, maybe a little more, like after I got off of work. And we thought, you know what? Let's give it a shot. If it doesn't work, then Bryce can find somebody else to do the show with him. Or if I'm like, wow, I don't have time, maybe we'll find somebody else to take it over. Because Bryce and I were both like, we have to know what happens next. Because we're reading through the Doctrines and Covenants, which are phenomenally boring.
Yeah.
Oh, man, it is some dry material.
Yeah.
But
so let me ask you a question. I met David at ReasonCon in Hickory, North Carolina a couple of years ago. It's kind of a podcast festival.
I've heard of that.
And let me understand, if I understand it correctly, he was reading cover to cover, like a linear reading of the entire Book of Mormon, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he went all the way through.
Week to week. It was a weekly show?
Yeah, it was weekly.
And he would just read a little bit, discuss it, comment on it, and, at the end of an hour or so, he'd shut it down and then take up where he left off.
Yep.
So he tried to make sense of it along the way. He would say, well, here's what they said. Now, maybe that means this, or maybe this, or like that.
Yeah. I would say that he waffled back and forth between being super logical about it and being super emotional about it.
Yeah.
Really?
Because some of it, there are little nuggets of true wisdom in the Book of Mormon, or in any religious text.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so when he would find those, he would stop and be like, yes, this makes absolute sense. This is a good thing to live your life by.
Yeah.
Which I always loved.
Call it like you see it. Yeah.
Yeah. But calling it like you see it is also like one thing that Bryce and I are running into a lot right now is we'll read something that would say, this is the way something is supposed to be. Like if you have adultery with anyone, then you should be punished by the laws of God. And then like literally 5 or 6 verses later say, if you have adultery, you should be punished by the laws of the land. Wait, what? Like how? Wait, no, it's right there. Yeah, this is...
So this is in the Doctrines and Covenants? And this is like an additional text?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
That the Mormons have?
I just assume everyone is like me and has binge listened to everything with Mormonism.
No, we're clueless.
Yeah.
I mean, all I know really about Mormonism is Utah, the nice...
Oh, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Have a nice, yes, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, very nice. And you have really nice building. It's a beautiful structure. But that's about the size of it. And a few other things that everybody, the underwear thing, the magic underwear. Yeah. The
gold
reading
plates.
Yeah, reading stuff out of the hat where we get...
Yeah.
Jesus coming to America.
Yeah, Jesus comes to America. The old Jews coming over on the boat. Oh, he did come to America, did he? Okay.
Okay. I'm going to back up. I'm going to give you my summary of what I think Mormonism is, which is based on the actual text and not having ever been to a Mormon church.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So the story, so-called story of Mormonism in general is that there were a group of Jews that were called by God to sort of wander in the wilderness, and then they took a boat across over to what we call the New World, the Americas.
Well, I hope it was a cruise ship because, Jews would like that. I was thinking, well, just me. They like to cruise. What can I say?
Yeah, it was a White Star Line boat, a la the Titanic. And
really
they came
nice,
across and it was,
nice China.
Yeah, so
absolutely,
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so once they get to the Americas, there are basically 2 families, or like 2 brothers. And one brother sort of chooses the path of evil and is cursed by God with dark skin. And later became, they're called the Lamanites, and later became the Native Americans here. And so the ones who chose God, they were white and delightsome and had white skin. And so they basically fought each other for a lot. And there's these epic battles. And some of them were like a paragraph long where 10,000 people from the Lamanites are fighting 20,000s from whoever the other side is. Shoot, I should remember it. I don't. And then they all killed each other. And then this one guy lived and went up. And except that there's no like actual record of these big battles having happened at all anywhere. So they fight a lot, and eventually the white and delightsome people are overpowered and killed by the Lamanites, who are dark-skinned and evil. It is so blatantly racist that it makes me want to barf.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Well, I mean, maybe not, but I mean, look at the year, the era out of which it came, too. You know, just before the Civil War and what have you. So there's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, because Joseph Smith, he found some golden plates in a hill, the Hill Cumorah in upstate New York, that had some etchings on it that was Reformed Egyptian. Reformed Egyptian is not actually a language that exists, and no one ever actually saw these golden plates except for Joseph Smith. Like, there's stories of people having seen them in a box, but just they only saw the box, or they touched the plates through some cloth and they knew that the plates were there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he had a hat and a magic rock that he translated them to several people along the way, which became the Book of Mormon. And then later on, as he's like starting his religion, he also found some documents that became the Pearl of Great Price that were also like translated from, it's a little sketchy. So it's like a supplemental word of God. And then there was another one called the Book of Abraham.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So then after that is all together. So then this is like the late 1820s.
Right.
And they're in New York. And so this is where I start to pick up and come into the podcast because then the Doctrines and Covenants happens. And this is revelations given through God to his prophet Joseph Smith to solve whatever problem is happening at that time.
Okay.
That last bit is just me. Whatever problems.
Yeah, sure.
Like, that's not what people actually say. So it solves things like we need to have some people go over there and get new members of our church. So God is going to give me revelation that these people need to go out and convert whoever, bring them to the church. Okay, so like that's a revelation. And there's some revelations saying, hey, you were not following what the word of God was and you're being annoying, so I'm going to put you on desk duty. Like, that also happened.
Really?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now, if anyone is listening to us, go over to my Book of Mormon podcast. I just posted part 3 of section 42. And this is a revelation that it's starting to give like the actual laws of the church. So section 41 is basically God telling them, you need to go from New York and everybody needs to move to Ohio. It's January 1831. You really need a revelation from God to tell you to move in the middle of January in the Midwest.
Yeah, and you're going to the Midwest from New York. Okay, well, good luck to you. All right.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, when Bryce and I were reading that, like, we just had this huge attack of empathy. Like, why?
Yeah, they're not going in over nice roads either. There's
no U-Hauls. It's like...
It seems to be typical of cults to have to keep moving because I know that Joseph Smith got in some legal trouble. And
he pisses people off.
Well, and people start to, they're on to you, and so you have to move. Yeah. I'm friends with Rachel Gunderson or something where she was in a cult. She was on Ryan Bell's show, and she was in a cult that started up in Washington State.
Yeah.
And then they moved down here to Columbia, Tennessee, which is just another suburb of the Nashville area.
Okay.
And, they just have to keep moving. And here's Joseph Smith saying, oh, by the way, we've got to move.
We got to move because they're coming with pitchforks for us.
Yeah,
I mean, he could have been killed.
Yeah, because part of why they were doing the pitchforks thing is that that Joseph Smith, there's a theme right now in the Doctrines and Covenants that everything is consolidating power with him and his buddies.
Yeah.
Which that's always a problem. And there's it's also recently become a thing where if you join the church, you give everything to the church, like all your possessions, all your belongings, and then it's given to the bishop, which at this point in history is a man named Edward Partridge. And it's actually ends up being called the Bishops Storehouse. And that's still a term that's used today. It's not used exactly the same way, obviously. But everyone would give their things to Edward, and he would dole them out according to need, which is kind of an oligarchy, I think, under the guise of communism. So that's a problem.
Yeah. That's Acts chapter 2. I mean, because the Book of Mormons also use the Bible, right?
Oh, yeah. There's sections of it that's like straight up taken from Isaiah.
Yeah, but I'm saying that they recognize the Bible as a holy text, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so
to my understanding,
they would look at Acts chapter 2 and maybe say, well, we need to do that. In Acts chapter 2, it says that the people of the church, they all,
get together.
Yeah, well, they collected all their belongings, and then
that's right.
They gave it out as people needed, and it is a socialism of sorts.
Yeah. The part of the problem, and of course my expert understanding as someone who has only read the text and doesn't know all of the historical context and did not grow up in the Mormon church, is that Joseph always had this propensity to find a pretty young thing and perhaps become really good friends with her.
If you know what I mean. Right.
Yeah. I mean, yes, he was married to Emma Smith, and at this point in 1831, we also just had a revelation that marriage is only between one man and one woman, and that's it. Which, that in 1832, that's about to get blown right out of the water as soon as Joseph has plural marriage. But so the beginnings of this weird sexual issues of Joseph sleeping with anything that moves has already begun. So he's already starting to get into trouble with the locals, and so he just happens to get a revelation from God, and then they all have to leave.
Right. So that's the trigger then, right? The sexual thing? That's what makes people so mad at him?
It's part of it, yeah.
Okay.
The
I'm
money,
sure they thought
the controlling.
Yeah. I'm sure
because it's a problem of not only is he sort of like underhandedly, sneakily sleeping with people that he should not be, he's also purporting himself to be the leader of this great church, and this church is taking everyone's resources and having them leave their families and take all of their savings and all of their belongings and just up and move to a different part of the country, or a different town. It's really creepy. And if you think of it in the context of today, if my sister, she's my sister, I love her, she's great. But if all of a sudden she called me up one day and said, hey, I'm moving to Alberta, Canada from California because I met this guy, and even though he's sleeping with my friend and he's married to this other woman, I think I need to give all of my belongings to him because my kids don't need to go to daycare. And I'd be like, what?
Well, but even in the 1830s, that's just got to be weird. Sure. I mean,
totally.
Just don't do that. I mean, I can't imagine anybody doing that, but apparently I'm wrong. So people did it.
Well, and I think that's worth mentioning that the only reason that we're even talking about this, or there is a whole podcast or several of them about this weird thing, because otherwise it's not worth anybody's giving it the time of day. Nobody should give a flying fuck about Joseph Smith or anything that he ever wrote.
Yeah.
In reality. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason that it's forced itself upon us is that millions and millions and millions of people to this day,
they still believe it and they still go out. One thing that I know that I'll eventually get to as I'm reading through all this is that there will be revelations that set up a structure for how the church is going to work that goes on in perpetuity. Because right now there's the leader of the church, whoever the leader of the church is, until that person dies, they are designated as the new prophet who receives revelation from God. And there's a quorum of elders that maintain the structure, like the logistical structure of the church, as well as the spiritual structure. So even though eventually Joseph Smith obviously dies, because he is human and humans die, that succession plan was in place. I mean, I'm not going to say this definitively because I'm not an expert in cults of religions, but usually when there's one person who's in charge, as soon as that person gets thrown in prison or dies, there's this vacancy that this power vacuum can't be filled by one designated successor. And so it just falls apart and dissipates. But that didn't happen with Mormonism because there were some really good logistical people behind the scenes. Like Joseph would have these revelations and basically be the idea guy. And then his buddies, who right now are consolidating all of the power in the church through these current revelations, eventually that foundation is going to be so solid that they can just continue the logistics of it once Joseph is gone.
Wow. So that sense that exists still today, I think, in some of the preachers we see on TV and what have you. That, the lasciviousness, the larceny in people's soul, that's been around forever, apparently, because...
Well, I want to get back to you, Marie.
Sure.
As Bob says about me, I poo-poo stuff that I could care less about. And it mostly has to do with the most extreme cases of religiosity showing up in the world. I'm bored to tears. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I never listened to your show or to David's show.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Is that I could care less what the Book of Mormon has to say. Even I'm a big fan of Scathing Atheists and No Illusions and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
I never miss a diatribe. and sometimes I let it keep rolling into the funny stuff.
Yeah.
But when they were reading the Bible and they were reading they read the Quran.
Right,
right. I just turn it off. I have no desire to know what's in these books. I mean, maybe it's because I devoted the first 39 years of my life to a different magic book.
Yes.
And I just, I'm so done. I'm just so done. So I'm not saying it's not a good show. It's just not. It's not up my alley. That's all I'm saying.
I think it's fascinating.
I have a pretty niche market here on the show.
Sure. Well, you know what? You told me to get 3 or 4 downloads per episode, which is more
3,000 or 4,000.
Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah, 3,000 or 4,000.
That's a lot of people.
Usually within the first week after I publish an episode, I usually get a little over 2,000.
Wow.
And then by about the time I hit a month, it's up to around 3,000, which is amazing. And also, I did nothing for that. That was all Dave and Michael. I just inherited this. It was pretty cool. Yeah. So typically, the format of the show is that Bryce Blankenagel and I will get together every week or every other week, and we'll record a couple episodes. And then sometimes I'll record one that's just me. Like, I'm just kind of trying it out. Yeah. Because before this, I have never podcasted in my life. Yeah. Like, this is brand new to me, and fortunately I love it, and I think I'm kind of good at it. So that's good.
Well, Marie, do you mind me asking how old you are?
Oh, I'm 35.
Okay. How long have you known Marie Lepage?
So I've known her, I started working at our company 3 years ago, and I think she started like 2.5 years ago.
Okay. So you've been friends for 2.5 years at least. Yeah. Like,
we were just kind of coworkers at first, and then you know how like you don't talk about some things in your life?
Sure.
She didn't talk about her past as been like a missionary living in Mexico.
Right.
Because you just don't really mention that in conversation right now. Right. Yeah, and I just never really mention that my dad was a Baptist pastor. Because Minneapolis is a land of Lutherans, and when most people hear Baptist, they think, oh, so you didn't dance, and you didn't drink, and you didn't play cards, and you just didn't, like this whole list of didn'ts.
Yeah.
And they
think of Footloose, the movie.
Yes, they really do. And that was not how religion affected my upbringing. Because yes, my dad was a Baptist pastor. He was also chaplain in the Air Guard for 27 years.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about that then. Your background. Where are you from originally then?
That's a great question.
Thank you so much.
And I don't know how to answer that.
You're military, right? Or
is that why? Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, where were you born then? How's that?
Technically, I was born in California, in the Los Angeles area. And my parents met in high school in Los Angeles because, like, my mom's mom was the lunch lady at the school where my dad's dad was a teacher.
Okay.
Oh.
So, like, yeah.
So you have heirloom hairnets. Very nice. Yes. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So when my mom was pregnant with me, my dad actually sort of transferred to the base nearest his parents in Los Angeles for like the last 2 months or so. Because it's not like you get paternity leave in the 80s when you have a baby. Yeah. So mom had the baby out in Los Angeles because that's where my grandparents lived. And so they were there for like 2 months, and then they came back to Texas, which is where they were living at the time. And that's where my dad was stationed.
So you kind of grew up in Texas then? Is that?
Yeah. Until around, I think, age 7 or 8. I don't remember exactly. And then dad got transferred up to the Duluth Air Force Base, and he found a church in a small town in Wisconsin. And so we moved up there. So, like, when somebody asks, where are you from? I'm like, well, I'm not from Los Angeles, because I'm just not. But I'm not really from Texas. But I can pull out a Texas accent like you would not believe, because that's where I spent my formative days. But then it's like, I'm not really from Wisconsin, because small town Wisconsin, like, you are from there if you've lived there for 2 generations.
Sure.
And I don't
that's
know.
possible to do that. I had
totally.
I had a father-in-law that stayed in one, probably 5 or 6 square miles for almost 80 years. He just did not leave. They just stay all the time. Well, so in Wisconsin, this is when the story gets interesting and a little strange and a little sad even. I mean, when I read about this, it just broke my heart. Some of the stuff you went through when you were just in like 6th grade or something. Could you talk about that? Do you feel comfortable talking about it?
I do, yeah. So this is something that I don't really talk about very much, but an interesting thing happens when your marriage implodes and you have a baby, and like my last 2 years have been crazy. But now that I'm at the end of it, I was like, things aren't quite so scary anymore. So my scary thing is that I was sexually abused in church for 6 years, 5, 6, 7, some longer than anyone should ever have to experience. I
mean, through like elementary school into high school, right?
Oh yeah, straight through high school. So what happened is that there was this boy in the youth group at my church, and he was 1 year older than me. And I mean, I was always a small kid, and he was always just a little bit larger. But as soon as he started hitting puberty, and I was always there because I was the pastor's kid, and so I was always around. And his parents were very active in the church, so we spent all our time together. And it's also a small town, so we were like in the same school. Like, you couldn't transfer in another class because like there was one 5th grade class. You know,
wow.
We were always together, and this particular religious environment that we were in, there was a thought that if you're in a church, you're a good person, and because everyone here is a good person, nothing bad could ever happen. And certainly nothing would ever bad would happen among the kids, because the kids are pure and innocent, because we're not teaching them about the evils of sex. Which is a problem, because he was starting to be interested in like, hey, there's a girl. She's really pretty. I think I want to touch her. And I was trying to follow the rules of God. Not that I know what they were, but, you know, I'm trying to, you know. And I was learning that women should be meek and that men are in charge, because that's just sort of how it was. And so he starts molesting me, and I didn't really know what to do with it, because I was like, you know, 6th grade. What does anybody know when they're in 6th grade? But I knew that I was being taught that you should never do anything sexual unless you're married, and if you do it outside of marriage, then it's a sin. So I was thinking, he's touching me, that's sexual, I'm sinning. So which is
another reason to keep it secret.
Yeah, it's a logical conclusion.
Wow.
That really only makes sense if you're in 6th grade.
Right.
Like, now that I'm older, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Yeah, you weren't thinking.
Well, you're not only in 6th grade.
No.
You're a woman, and you're raised in a patriarchal Christian hegemonic environment.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That suppresses your whatever little agency you might have as a human 6th grader. You have none.
I have none.
Yeah. You have your thoughts, your intents, your desires. Even if you were to say to him, which I kind of want to ask you, hey, can we, I want you to stop this.
Yeah, cut it out.
I mean, was that ever a conversation with him?
I did try, and he basically responded by telling me that I was wrong because I was letting it happen, and that if I told anybody else, then I would get in trouble, and he would just lie and say that I was making it up.
Wait a minute, you were wrong?
Yes.
God,
yeah.
well, that's typical. Crap,
That's the way they.
That's
like,
the way
it's
they
so
treat it.
twisted. Like, it is
gaslighting.
Classic abuse. Yeah, it's gaslighting, but I didn't even know what gaslighting was.
Right.
And I just had no idea what to do. So I just kind of tried to avoid him, which sort of worked, except that we were always at church together. We were always at school together, and our parents were friends, and so we would hang out on weekends, and the parents would say, hey, kids, go over, play in your bedroom.
Oh, my God.
Oh, jeez.
Yes.
So did some of this...
did, apparently.
Yeah.
Did some of this sexual activity happen in the church?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I hate churches to this day. In part because if you look at a church, like a typical like Christian church, I mean, well, not like I go to a lot of temples or anything, but there are closets everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And there are no
Sunday
windows
school
into
rooms
rooms. Sunday school rooms, at least particularly back then, and all the ones that I was ever at, you shut the door and there's no window in that door.
Yeah.
Wow.
There are pockets to hide everywhere.
Well, I'm not an expert or a specialist, and I haven't counseled a lot with people. But here's one of the things that I just have to suspect that this is part of what really, really complicates it. Okay, so he says, "Well, you're doing it too," and
You're not stopping me.
well, you're trying, but it's like whatever. But here's the thing, and I've always felt this. Now, my abuse and everything happened when I was 5, and I don't remember much about it, and I certainly didn't have the volition to push back.
This was the babysitter,
Yeah,
right?
it was a babysitter thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it just opened up a lot of things for me at a young age. But at your age, at that age, now, and you haven't even started your period yet at this point.
No, definitely not.
So I'm just thinking that even as it went into your teens, like as you did go through puberty, you went through puberty through this abuse.
Yes, absolutely.
And so did he.
He was my first kiss, unfortunately. Like he was my only everything for the duration, because whenever I would show an interest in someone else, it was almost like he owned me.
Yeah.
If someone showed an interest in me, he would go and start saying bad things about me to them. And he ended up being like the star quarterback in our high school.
Yeah.
And he was a very good student. I mean, I was a really good student too, but I was really good at math, and girls aren't supposed to be good at math. So it was like, well, you're doing great for a girl, but he would do great and be the star quarterback. And so like, he was like the guy. Yeah. So
was he sleeping with other women during this time, and you were just on the side, or?
As far as to back up, we never actually slept together. Thank God.
What do you mean? You never had intercourse?
We never had, there was no penis and vagina.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's because by the time he was really wanting to do that, he had found somebody else. Yeah. So to kind of skip ahead here, when I was a sophomore, like by this point, it had been years of basically, I was getting grabbed and groped and fingered and like everything multiple times a week. At school, at church, usually on a weekend, because we would be getting together with his family. Like it was constant. And so I was just retreating into myself, and I just had no power. I felt I had power. I just didn't know it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, right, sure.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I could do was I could control food. So I had become anorexic at this time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah.
It does. Like it's the only control that I had, that I felt I had. And so my parents had noticed. They're like, this isn't right. So I was going to like group counseling at school. And so there was a group of girls who were all anorexic. And I mentioned once in that group in front of the counselor that there was this guy that he'd been touching me. And every single one of them went, me too. And I said, was it him? And they all went, yes.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, so there were 6 of us.
Oh my gosh.
And all of us realized that we were all trying to hide from him. And this is the part that just makes me so angry, because the counselor was right there.
Yeah.
She was right there. Like, and she's a mandatory reporter.
Yeah.
So like imagine you're in a room full of 6 girls who are all anorexic, and they're all just trying to, whatever.
Trying not to die.
Yeah, we're trying not to die. And we all mentioned, here's this one man. Well, because at this point, like I think he was 17 at the time, and we were all like 15 or 16. And we all say, this one guy is making our lives hell. What would you do if you were that counselor? Wouldn't you say, contact the police, be a mandatory reporter? You know what she did? She got him kicked out of NHS with the National Honor Society, and that was it.
Ooh, that
I
hurt.
know.
That hurt.
Yeah, and then she wouldn't be his, she decided not to be his reference for college. But he's, like, that was the only impact that happened to him. But because of this event where there was this group of us and we're talking about it, we started watching out for each other. Yeah. And so we were never alone. And so we basically cut off all of his access to anyone in the school.
Yeah.
So that's when it stopped for me.
Yeah.
What a story. What a story.
Yeah.
Gee
And
whiz.
Do you know where he is today?
I do.
President
Yes.
of some giant corporation, I'm sure.
Yeah. No. He joined the Air Force, and he didn't do very well, and so he was discharged. And I know that he started working for an airline, but he was woefully incompetent for something, and I know he got fired. Mm-hmm. And so he ended up moving back in with his parents. And so he lives in Eau Claire now. And as far as I know, because I still do sort of have this connection, and I hear about him every once in a while because, high school people, miracle of Facebook or whatever. Basically, he's still living with his parents. He is married. He has 2 daughters, which,
Scares you?
Yeah.
yeah, it scares the crap out of me. But it's like, there's nothing I can do. I don't really know what would I do? I'd call up and say, hey, by the way, you did these terrible things to me. Maybe don't hang around your daughters, or like, what would I tell this wife? Or I don't really know. And I don't want him to know where I am.
Yeah.
And I don't want that contact. So
Yeah.
I do think about it a couple times a month. I'm like, should I do anything? What can I do that would still protect me? But
I think in some ways you want to keep it in your rearview mirror. You don't want to reopen that wound or pull the scab off of that.
And Marie, you said something, and the way you said it made me think, well, I understand this. You said, he was my first kiss. And I know that's important to young girls,
It
and
is.
so this is a person. I'm not saying that you were in love with the guy.
Oh
but,
God, no! But
but this was like a special. You got at least for that kiss, you got something out of it that was important to you, even though it was pretty shitty.
There's also that thing that little girls are always taught that it's sort of supposed to be like the movies, and particularly if you're in a Christian whatever. World, that whenever you do have that first kiss or that first person you hold hands with, it's supposed to be blessed by God, and it's supposed to be wonderful, and the music will play and everything will be beautiful, and then the credits will roll. And that isn't what happened to me.
Mm-hmm. No.
So I've always felt a little sadness because I never went on a date in high school because there was always this guy, and I knew that I couldn't really go on a date with anyone else because he'd be angry with me and it would be so much worse.
Wow.
Because I kind of tried, but then, the wrath of somebody who's controlled you for several years, I couldn't.
Wow.
And because he was, his parents were friends with your parents, and it was a family thing, it was a church thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, if you had a military dad, I'm a dad of 3 daughters, and it's almost instinctive for dads to protect their daughters and to care about who they're seeing. And I mean, have you ever resented your dad for not engaging, or did you ever tell your parents that it was happening?
I didn't know how to tell my parents.
Well, you were ashamed.
I was extremely ashamed, and I'm also by nature a rule follower. So yes, my dad is my dad, and I love him to pieces. He's great. Cool. I have a wonderful relationship with my parents,
great.
And they do know all about this now.
Okay.
But at the time,
and they believe you.
Oh yeah, they believe me now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're horrified this was going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they just had no idea.
Sure.
Because I hid it so well because I was so ashamed.
Right.
And I was also, because I was assuming I was sinning, even though as an adult, I'm like, I was not sinning at all. So I was convinced that because I kept sinning, and I'm saying this with big air quotes, that it meant that what if God wouldn't forgive me for this continued sin? And what if God kept me out of heaven? So what if I ended up going to hell because of you? So that's where my brain went.
Wow.
And
so hell was a very real thing to you.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very convinced that there was a heaven that I was trying really hard to get into. So I was trying to be a good person. I was trying to read the Bible regularly. I was trying, everything that you're supposed to do to get into heaven, whatever that means for you. I was trying to do it, but I kept on, quote unquote, sinning. And so it was like there was this battle with me. Like, how do I stop this thing? But I can't stop it.
So the guy was clearly fondling you and what have you. But you were sinning. And so because of that, something you had no control over, you were going to burn forever in fire and brimstone. Okay.
Yeah. And part of why I believe that so strongly, so like the molestation started in 6th grade. By 7th grade, I was a wreck. And so I was crying all the time, but I was also this was right around when I was starting my period. So like my parents were like, well, she's really emotional. I don't know. Kids are emotional. She's in junior high. I mean, how do you tell the difference between emotional wreck in junior high?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
come on.
Yeah.
No way.
That's the perfect storm that's going on here because of the religious construct or the religious scaffolding around it is probably why you guys didn't penetrate in intercourse.
Yeah.
It's because it's almost like, well, we're not actually, we're still virgins.
Right.
We're still virgins. As long as we're virgins, then it's okay.
Yeah, you can kind of tell yourself that we're not sinning, and yet you kind of are telling yourself and maybe feeling that you are.
But you're not, but you are,
and
but you're not.
Here's what I was talking about earlier where I think it gets really complicated, is if anywhere in that 7-year period, that the weekly sexual activity that went on in your life for 7 straight years, if anywhere in that time frame you actually enjoyed it for a second, that's going to complicate your guilt and shame.
It totally did, because even though I didn't want it to happen,
well, you're human.
It still feels kind of good, and biology is a thing.
Like you said, you're human.
You can, when you said I didn't love him, well, but it was kind of nice probably for you to think that at least you had the quarterback on your leash. Like you could feel like that you, and what was the secret that you didn't know was you thought he had him all to himself, and he's a predator.
Yeah. Yes.
It was not just me.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Well, yeah, and the one thing that made me decide that this was just how my life was going to be was in 7th grade, I went to my band teacher, and I was like, I don't think this is right. This thing that's happening to me, I don't think it's right. He's touching me. I don't like it, but I don't know how to stop. Can you help me? And again, teachers are mandatory reporters. And so this teacher, this breaks my heart when I think about it, but he said, what you let happen to God's temple is your fault. You need to pray and repent.
Oh my.
Yeah, it says he was the band teacher, but small town Wisconsin. He was also like the deacon at the local Catholic church. And he's the guy that taught religious everything on Wednesdays for the kids who are going to get confirmed. And so, yeah, in this time, instead of being a teacher and helping your student, he took the tact of religion, and I must be making this up, and I'm choosing to do this sexual thing, so I just need to stop doing it.
So he's like blame the victim kind of thing.
Yeah, it was epic victim blaming.
One of the things that Cass said was, the scaffolding of religion is around you, and then you've got the superimposition of 1980s culture as well. Yes, and we don't, we think of ourselves, well, it was the 80s, we're pretty advanced, but not really. I mean, we're not like we are today. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, there's also a lot more knowledge sharing today, because I have to remind myself that in the late 80s, early 90s, computers did exist, but the internet was like a thought that maybe something might be connected someday. Because in 1992, I think this was right around when Al Gore is inventing the internet.
Yes,
that's where we are.
That's when it started. That's when I think George Bush signed the law that made it give the internet to the people. Kind of thing.
It was right around then. So by the time I was in high school in the late 90s, then people knew what the internet was. But like Facebook didn't exist. Sure. Google wasn't around. Like this is an era of Netscape. So it wasn't like I could go and say, like, type in somewhere. No. I am being molested. What do I do? Like you wouldn't even get any results.
No.
Right.
So I have to remember that nobody had that access. All you had was this book from a couple thousand years ago, kind of, to maybe sort of guide you. But it was just a culture of, well, don't talk about it. Don't talk about your mental illness. Don't talk about your depression. Don't talk about the bad things. Like, just, it'll be okay. Just don't.
I was thinking you told your psychologist or your group leader or whatever who was a woman, and she probably because she was a woman, she felt like she couldn't do anything about it. Yeah. And then you told this other guy who could have done something and should have done something, and he chose not to. Yeah, and he was sort of stuck in that. He was stuck too. Man, and so everybody, and you're the one that suffers. Everybody gets to go. I mean,
everybody else is okay because they're just assuming that I will have fixed it, and so they're absolved. But there wasn't anything that at the time I could fix because I was I was just a little girl.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Did this turn you into an atheist, or is this the thing, or was there something else, another trigger, or?
This was a major part of it, definitely. But I kept on thinking, God must be good, and God just must be testing me some way. Maybe I'm Job. Maybe I'm a current version of Job, and all the bad things are happening. You know, maybe that's my lot in life. Who knows? But I just wanted to get away. Like I didn't know how, and so I would try to go to like summer camps, except that I would go to a summer camp, and my mom would talk to his mom, and then he would hear about it. And he's like, "Oh, I want to go to that camp too."
Shit.
Yes.
Gee, no way out.
Yeah, there was no way out. I tried. I did get to go to a Girl Scout camp one summer for a week, and it was awesome because it was only girls. It was one of the highlights of my childhood. I loved it. I mountain biked through the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin for a week. Fantastic.
Yeah. But when did you leave the faith?
So when I was in between my junior and sophomore years of high school, I went on a missions trip around the United States and Canada, and so I was away from him for 8 weeks. And it was wonderful in that regard, but in another regard, it was really deep study into the Bible, but it was done by people who weren't my parents and who weren't Baptist. It was a non-denominational Christian thing, except that meant that I was hearing very slight variations about tiny things like how baptism works or the correct order for a church service, or like how you relate to God, how faith versus works happens in terms of getting to heaven. Like all these little things. And I thought, wait a minute. What? Hold on. What do you mean faith versus works? I'd never even heard of like the difference. It was fundamentally different than what I'd thought was the one true way to believe in God. And so I come back, and it was like my eyes had opened with regards to how pervasive religion was in my life, and that maybe this thing that was in every aspect of my life wasn't 100% correct or verifiable proof. And I believe I mentioned earlier that I was good at math. I'm really good at science too. Like I'm a really good student. And so I was thinking of all these logical proofs that I'd been learning in like my calculus class or my geometry class of if this, then that, otherwise that, a basic if-then statement. And I couldn't get the religious things that I'd been taught growing up to match up with the religious things I'd just learned for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I started asking people in the church, well, what do you think about baptism? What do you think about faith versus works? What do you think about heaven? What about hell? And everybody had a different answer. And I had assumed that everybody believed exactly the same thing. And it was the beginning of this crack of this ironclad, God is always correct, God is good, God is... And I thought, what if God doesn't actually exist, and this is a social construct where we can all get together weekly to, have some social time, but, hear some good things about God being good, and then have some punch and pie, and then go home.
Yeah.
Well, you were seeing the weakness of the whole thing. Like,
yeah.
In order for you to build your life on something, you need it to be robust. You need it to be bulletproof, and
it wasn't.
And
not at all.
So now you're having less and less confidence in what you have been basing your life on. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'd sort of been thinking that, I'm being molested on the regular, but at least God loves me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I was like, what if this idea of God isn't the right thing? And how do I actually know that God exists? Has God ever shown himself to me or actually proven something to me that couldn't be explained away by science or coincidence? And the answer was no. And but at this point, I was almost out of high school. So at this point, I'm like, by the time I really start thinking about these and really dealing with it, I'm like 17, and I realized that in like 6 months or so, I get to leave. Like, I love my parents. I love my home. I have some good friends here. But not only is this guy who has been tormenting me for years, he had just left for college, which was just wonderful.
Yeah.
That was great. I had a wonderful senior year. And then I was like, I can go to college someplace else, and I don't have to tell anybody where that is. Like, I can just go. Wow. And my whole world opened up. And so I ended up going to a Lutheran college. because they gave me fantastic financial aid.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is the reason I could afford to go to college. And I was like, I can deal with Lutheranism. That's fine.
Yeah.
I could deal with anything. Because it was like, I didn't do super great in my religion classes there because it was Christianity 101, but it was Lutheranism for Lutherans.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Luther was. I had no idea he had a catechism. And so I'm asking all these questions like, wait, what's the catechism? And this whole room of blonde-haired Lutherans goes, what?
Yeah.
And so after seeing that difference in how all these people that are like now my friends in college, how they've always believed in God and God is this one true thing with this one. And I was like, well, this is totally different from what I grew up with.
Yep.
Sure.
That was the final nail in the coffin. I was like, you know what? I'm done. I just can't do this anymore.
Well, and now it makes sense a little bit that, all right, so you're raised preacher's kid, and this is a lock solid truth that these parental authoritative figures have told you, and because you're a concrete thinker, and this is the truth.
Yeah.
And then you go to that missions trip, and they're kind of talking non-denominational, and it's a little different spin. And you're like, wait a second, that's you're talking differently about things that I thought were signed, sealed, and delivered, like sealed up.
Right.
Yeah.
Like baptism is immersion. It's not sprinkling. Why are we talking about this?
Yeah. Except that all of a sudden, no, baptism is sprinkling, and you have to do it when you're a baby, otherwise it doesn't count. And I'm like, wait,
It's
what?
like, wait, you're changing the rules on me here. Then you get to Lutheran college, and they've got a different spin. And so I'm just saying it makes sense that when you stumbled onto the My Book of Mormon podcast, you were like, here's yet another group of people that feels 100% certain that their way is right.
Yep.
And now just the foolishness and the folly of human beings trying to write religions and craft narratives, master narratives, that you're like, okay, we've been making this shit up
For
forever.
so long.
And then it was just kind of like you were onto it, and it was exposed for the folly that it is.
Well,
And part of what I really find fascinating are connections. Like, this happens here, so something else happens over there. Which is part of why I'm a data analyst in my day job, because my job essentially is people ask me questions and I answer them with charts and graphs, which is a handy way of saying, I think this thing happened. Why did it happen? Can you look through the numbers and either prove it for me or say that this isn't true? Or, So it's very concrete, but it's also very connected. So when I am reading these Doctrines and Covenants, on the one hand, oh yeah, so boring. Like, this is like the minutes from the notes from somebody's boring Wednesday meeting. Like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, like, we know basically the time of year, and so the month and year, and occasionally the day that a thing happens. But because it was like the 1830s at this point, there are actual like newspapers that exist from back then, and the documents that they were writing, we have some of those. And so we can go back and look at court records from when Joseph Smith was being, tried for basically being a liar and trying to steal money from people. It's right there. And so I see it as, here's this major thing that happened in American history that was very directly related to how Utah exists.
Right, sure.
And I find that fascinating. So I'm learning about the religion, but I'm also learning about the people.
Yeah.
That what kind of person would do this or become the bishop in this cult religion thing? Oh, because he's getting all the money? Oh, that's fascinating. And why would these other people join? Oh, because you're going to be able to have 10 wives if you're just really nice to this guy? Oh! So I like finding connections, and also the fact that it is a religion where I personally think that it is just it's a little bit off the wall.
Yeah.
It's helping me process my own
humanity.
My own humanity, and also my disgust at having been taught that this is the one true way.
Oh yeah.
When actually it's not.
No.
And I don't want to say that I think that anyone who who's very devoutly religious in any context, that they're wasting their life away. Like, there are a lot of good things with religion. That isn't my experience, and that isn't what happened to me.
Right.
And in my world, religion was used to control me and to keep me quiet and to make me smaller.
Yep.
And so if I can read this Doctrines and Covenants thing, have a really good time, learn about some history. Bryce and I spend most of our time talking about all this, just laughing. And it is so therapeutic to laugh for at least an hour every week.
Yeah.
If somebody else maybe listens to it and they're like, wait, this is different than what I was taught. If it can start them on a journey to truly think critically, be who they want to be, like discover what their life goals are without this context of somebody who died 100 or more years ago saying this is how it should be in a different time, in a different place. That's worth it to me.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, when you said connection, and I know as a data analyst and a numbers cruncher.
You mean a nerd? Yes.
Yeah, a math nerd or whatever.
Yeah.
You're looking for correlations and connections, and it makes sense that, I mean, so just last week we had a guy on the show. His name's Chris Johnson, and he produced a documentary. And he's an atheist. He's a lifelong atheist, but he basically is trying to dispel the myth and the misconception that atheists are miserable, or that atheists.
I'm really not. I'm so happy.
Well, of course not.
Yeah, you sure sound.
I'm a happy person.
Right, but one of the things that he said that it rings true in the context of what you're saying is that he is willing to look at religion historically to ask the question, what need did this meet in human beings? Because millions of well, and even today, millions of human beings are embracing these things, whether it's Lutheran or Baptist or non-denom or Mormon.
Yeah.
And what is it? What is it about? What's going on here in these texts and in these master narratives that people say yes to? That people are like needing this, and that's kind of what I meant by humanity, and what I heard you say about learning about people is it's like, why do we fall for this shit? As opposed
why
to
is this a thing?
As opposed to just calling it shit, it goes a step further and say, why do we like shit? What's going on? Why do we as humans like shit and need it?
Yeah,
and digest it?
I know that I personally crave rules. I do best when there are deadlines and boundaries. Yeah, structure it's a thing for me. That's just my personality.
Sure.
And so if I lived back in the day before the internet, back before I could have my own career and my own job and, basically autonomy of my own life, I could see having a religious framework to help me know that this is the correct way. I could see that being very comforting. Yeah. Because then I wouldn't have to worry, like, am I doing this right? I would just know.
Yeah.
So even if that premise is flawed and if it was made up by humans, well, ideally it would be so everyone that was part of that religious whatever would be better together and stronger.
Right.
I would like to think.
I'm listening to you talk, and I think, well, let me just take a step back. And so here's a little girl that was terribly treated, during her younger years, and thank God, eventually everything. Thank whoever. Well, you know what I mean.
Nobody does.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, eventually you're fine. You marry. You have children. You're a wonderful person. And you have two boys?
Yeah, so basically a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old.
So you've got that, and there are a couple of questions that just stick out. One is, how are you going to make sure your boys aren't going to be like the dickish fella that happened, in high school?
I have thought about that extensively.
And what do you think?
Well, right now I'm trying to teach them body autonomy, which is really hard to do with a 1-year-old who doesn't speak English. Like he has like 3 words and they're uh-oh, wow, and oops, right? But if you've ever seen small children of, say, the 4-year-old and the 1-year-old range, they are always crawling all over each other and grabbing each other's hair. And so their dad and I have had discussions like, how do we teach these kids not to be assholes?
Yes.
And so right now we're trying to teach, especially the 4-year-old, the word respect. Like you need to respect your brother. And that means you don't run by and shove him on the ground. Don't grab his hair. If he's grabbing your hair, step away, say no thank you, and come find mommy or daddy. So like it's starting really small with like don't
sense.
Gouge your brother's eye out. But as they get older, like I'm going to slowly transition to when you see someone, ask before you give them a hug.
Consent.
Like ask permission. Yeah. Like this is what consent means. Yep. And like with my older one, because he has some food allergies going on. He has asthma, so we go to the doctor a lot. And so I'm starting to explain to him now that he's old enough to understand. We're going here. You're going to take your shirt off, and that's okay because mommy's here, and they're doing it for these very specific reasons, like a skin prick test to test for mold or whatever. But it's so, I'm trying to be very, very concrete about it, that if mommy wasn't here, if it wasn't a doctor's office specifically needing you to take off your shirt, you don't take off your shirt. Yes, you're in daycare and everybody in preschool goes to the bathroom in a herd, because you've got like 10 3-year-olds waiting in the hall while everybody's attempting to learn how to go potty, because this is potty training. So you do it in a herd. But we've just gotten to the point now that my son is potty trained. Like, yes, we are all in the same bathroom stall because you're not tall enough to be able to get onto this big potty. But as soon as you're big enough, you can go and do this by yourself and no one else goes potty with you.
Right. Oh, good.
So this is the very, very beginning stages, because right now they don't even understand the concept of Thursday versus Friday. So the concept of molestation versus rape, like what?
Yes,
sure.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah, like that's a little too deep, but like their dad knows my history. We've talked about it extensively.
Yeah.
He also believes in consent for very obvious reasons. I wouldn't have married him otherwise.
Right, sure.
But one thing that is also really nice between us is we're both atheists, but we aren't angry about it. We're both like, we don't believe in God. Both sets of our parents definitely do. And that's okay. They can. We'll be respectful. And so we're starting to teach the boys, like, church is something that happens with the grandparents, and some people believe too. And so we're trying to teach, particularly the 4-year-old, like, you go and you listen to the music, and you color in your coloring book. We'll talk about God later, but right now, church is just a thing where they get to snuggle with a grandparent for an hour in a pew. Yeah, like they don't really care.
Do your parents know that you're atheist? I guess you're
they do.
You're way out. Yeah.
So they're apparently fine with that, huh?
They're sad about it because I think their big concern was that back in the 80s, they believed the stereotype that if you are an atheist, then you are obviously doing drugs and sleeping with everything and worshiping Satan in your basement and bloodletting and calling demons. Like, no.
Is that what they do?
Yeah, of course. But now they're like, oh, but none of... So I have some siblings and none of us go to the church, but we're all really good people and we have good friends and good social networks and we're raising wonderful children. Like things are really quite good. And my parents are like, well, maybe it's not quite so much that you need to believe in this specific version of God. It's that you need to live these values.
Yeah.
And so they taught us the values to live by. And so, they were in a religious context, but if that context is be respectful to people, be kind, help your fellow man, assist the poor as you're able. Dude, we can do that. I don't need a church to tell me to do that, but that's what we're doing. So it ends up working out okay.
Right.
Well, it sounded like your parents, even though they're still Christians, their faith has evolved over the years, right?
Very much, yes.
So they're doing the best they can with what they got.
Yeah, I was thinking too.
You had 2 questions, you said.
Well, I just have one. Now, left over.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, yeah.
What's left?
Well, the other one was, you talk about your young child, your 4-year-old having allergies and what have you. I don't know. It's just sort of a look at the current events. What about things like the EpiPen? When you see that happen, when you know that maybe your child one of these days will need that.
You carry an EpiPen, don't you?
Oh, gosh, yeah. The costs of EpiPens, it just tripled, quadrupled.
Went from $100 to $600.
We need to get EpiPens every February because that just happens to be when my son's anaphylactic allergy was first diagnosed, which the way, when I say that, it sounds very clinical. What it actually means is he ate a bite of bread that had almond flour in it, and he was sitting at the table and he looked at me and his lips swelled, and then he started clawing his tongue until it bled. So that's how we found out about the allergy.
My God.
Yeah.
God,
so
that would
hello,
just scare the
EpiPens
shit
and
out of you.
Benadryl. Oh, it was terrifying. And it's
Yeah.
happened 3 times since then with other things.
Oh.
Yeah. It's really terrifying. But I don't have the option to not have EpiPens.
Yeah.
And I have to have a set at his dad's house. I have to have one at my house, and I have to have one at daycare. And if we don't have an EpiPen at daycare, he can't go in the building.
Wow.
So when the cost of EpiPens triples, I feel fear.
Oh,
But
yeah.
fortunately, ours are good through February, and I'm hoping something will work out, because otherwise, like, okay, we are going to spend $900 on EpiPens because he's our son.
Yeah, of course.
We have to. So, okay, let's have a little bit of credit card debt. Let's just not go to the cousin's wedding over there. Like, let's...
Wow.
Okay.
And isn't it true that you only get like 2 shots out of it or something?
Well, you get each EpiPen pack
Yeah.
has 2 little distribution things. What, I
Okay.
don't remember. I don't know what the word is.
Yeah.
So, and the reason they have that is because they're only good for about 10 to 15 minutes. So whoever it is has a reaction. You give them the EpiPen shot, and then you hope like hell that the ambulance can get there in 10 to 15 minutes. And if they don't, that's why you have the second one.
Well, Marie, this is just one of the many prices that we have to pay for trusting capitalism and keeping government out. We need a small government, and we need big free market capitalism where greed is good. Didn't you know this, Marie?
Yeah, greed is good. And your child dying, well, that's just the price you pay. You know?
It's important that government get out of the way and let people make as much money as they can when people have their backs against the wall and life or death situation needs this EpiPen. This is capitalism at work, motherfuckers.
It really is. And I just, part of being a parent is you find a way. And we're going to find a way, and we're going to make it work. And but I also am aware that my kid's dad and I, we have a certain amount of privilege going on in our lives, in part because we're both white, and I know that I have certainly benefited from that. Also, now that I am in a career field, I am a woman in math and programming, which that really helps. Like 20 years ago, I don't think I would have made it anywhere. Like, it's just that wasn't an option for me. But now, like, it's important that companies demonstrate that they are hiring everyone, which means that in typically a male-dominated field like IT or math or analytics or something, that there are women in the workforce. So that's how I got into my career field.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's like the first analyst job that I got, I was the only woman. It was a small team of like 6 people, but it was me and like 5 guys in their 40s. So now, 10 years later, I work in a department, and I think there's like 40 of us, and it's pretty evenly split, men and women. And in terms of Minnesota, it's pretty diverse. Like, not everybody is white. Hooray! Which that shouldn't be a notable thing, but it is.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
So you're a single mother in a way of 2 small children. You probably don't have much time for yourself, but
No.
do you ever go out or do something fun or do something for yourself?
I do, yeah. So right now, I have the boys 50% of the time, which is actually kind of nice.
Yeah.
Because like I always know that I have Tuesday and Wednesday nights free.
Yeah.
So right now, at least one of those nights every other week, I record a podcast, and usually one of those other nights or like on a weekend, I'll like just edit it all. So that's cool, but it is so wonderful. So on Friday night, I felt so fancy. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I have an art gallery opening that I'm going to. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So it was
super.
Yeah, it was so bizarre because I worked all day, and then I had to go to a pharmacy to get some medication for my oldest, and then I brought it over to their dad's place, and I nursed my 1-year-old because I'm still breastfeeding, even though he's like with me half the time. And and then so I came home and I got dressed and I put on my makeup and I looked really pretty. And I went to an art gallery opening at this artist loft along the river overlooking downtown Minneapolis. And I'm like drinking champagne, discussing, of all things, Hunger Games with this whole group of gay guys. And I'm like, this is the best.
That's awesome.
I'm having a wonderful night.
Yeah. Well, do you do movies? You go out and see films, and apparently you saw Hunger Games.
Well, yeah, of course I did. For my birthday, I happened in July. I happened to not have the boys with me the weekend of my birthday. So I put out a call to everyone I'd ever met and said, hey, who's going to go see Ghostbusters with me? And because I live in the best part of town ever, like literally 20 people showed up at my house and we walked half a mile to see Ghostbusters.
That's so cool.
And then we all went out to a pizza place afterwards. And then we came back to my place. And like, there's a field right behind my house, randomly, in between my house and a pretty major intersection that's on a high frequency bus route. And so like all of my friends just took the bus there and we hung out in a field and we like played Frisbee. And it was
Best birthday ever.
It was an amazing birthday. I was like, 35, this year is going to rock.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a social creature. So when you say like, what do you do when you don't have the kids, which is kind of what you're implying, I was like, I do whatever I want.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I actually am going out to Fort Collins, of all places, in the middle of September because it's actually for the podcast. Because I've never been in a Mormon anything. Like, I've never even seen a Mormon temple. But a listener let me know that if there's a temple that's being constructed before it's dedicated, they have open houses and they'll take you on tours. And so I did a quick Googling and there's one in Fort Collins that it's being dedicated in October, but they're giving tours through the middle of September. So I messaged my friend Chad. I was like, hey, Chad, want to go to Fort Collins? He was like, yeah, why? So we're going to go. Yeah, we're going to tour Mormon Temple. I'm going to do an episode about it. Then we're going to go to a couple breweries because who wouldn't go to a Mormon temple and then a brewery?
Or just the brewery.
Yeah.
Let's skip the temple.
For just me.
That's just me. Well, Marie, I just have to say that your story, I think that there's certainly a big chunk of a chapter in your life where you probably felt trapped.
Yes, very, very.
Maybe even to some degree hopeless. Like, I mean, I think when you saw your graduation approaching and you were like, it hit you. I
can get out. Yeah.
You saw like your plane was taxiing the runway and you were next in line to fly the fuck out of here.
Yes.
And so there was some hope, but for those 7 years, it's almost like these stories where you hear about a woman is abducted and she's put in the basement and chained up or whatever. In some ways, you were chained up as a sex slave to this motherfucker.
I was, yeah.
And now, I guess what we're saying, there's hope in your voice, there's a bounce in your step, and
I think the word you're looking for is joy.
Yeah, there's a joy there that you have, and I would say it's not insignificant that you are a female mathematician in a man's world and you are bringing it, you're doing it, and you have agency, you have autonomy, you have a voice.
Thank you.
And you went from being a nothing with no agency and no power and all alone and no one would listen to you, and even if you did tell them, they would ignore you or blame you. To a woman now with autonomy and agency and power and independence. It's just it's
great.
It's
great
beautiful.
Story. Great story. Absolutely.
Thank you. I feel like just in this last couple months, not just because of the podcast, but because of the way my life has been, that I'm really truly being myself.
There you go.
And it's glorious.
Yeah.
And what I really want is for everyone to do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And it's really scary.
Yeah.
Because it was terrifying to make that choice of I'm going to leave this hometown that is everyone I've ever really known, and I'm going to go to college someplace where I don't know anybody just because I know I need to get out, but I'm going to do it. And that's really, really hard, particularly at like 18 or like, I don't actually, because I was really young when I started like my first grade of school, I ended up being 17 when I graduated from high school. And so to start college just a hair over 18 is really terrifying somewhere else it's not like my parents made a lot of money being a pastor and a teacher in rural Wisconsin.
Right.
We were poor. So it's not like I had a safety net to go back on. But the payoff, like the long game, look at my life today, and it's pretty amazing. It's not perfect. Obviously, I was not planning on having 2 small children and co-parenting through a divorce. Like, that was not in the plans. But like,
welcome
we're
to
doing
life.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
welcome to life. And it's going fine. We're doing great.
You've adapted well. You'd rolled with the changes. And,
Thank you.
I'd sound patronizing to say this, but I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. No, you know what? I actually makes me feel good because I do get a fair amount of side eyes and disapproving glances when they're like, "Oh, you're divorced."
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
It's a bigger story than that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it feels good to be told that I'm doing all right, even though I know I am. But tell me more about how good I am.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So you feel good about our talk?
I do. Yes, very much.
Well, good.
Yeah.
And I hope that your listeners will enjoy hearing your story, because obviously on the podcast you don't talk about you talk about the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Or the
No, I do mention my little boys every once in a while just because,
Well, that's awesome. So what we'll do is we'll send you a link, I suppose, once we get it all edited and stuff.
Okay.
And if you feel like you want to let it out there, please do.
Yeah, no, I will. I'm going to direct everybody over to your podcast too.
Okay, sounds good. And if there's anything else, we also put like links on the page. So
okay,
we do that.
Yeah, I mean, you can just put the link to my Book of Mormon podcast.com.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No problem there.
That's where everything is.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Marie, great. Just wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for letting me tell my story. This was the first time I've ever told it, so it feels good.
Yeah, Marie Kent.
Wow, what a story. What an unbelievable story.
You know, I think one of the things that struck me when I hear a woman say of herself, when she was talking about primping that night to go out that night, and she says, and I was pretty.
And I was pretty. Yeah.
I absolutely love when a woman can say that about herself unashamedly.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's just so sweet. And she said that things like the first kiss was such an important thing to her. You could tell in her voice, that it really was a very important thing to her.
Yeah, but it was so tainted.
Oh, God. Yes. And I was thinking, don't think badly of me for this, because I know, I think this young man, whoever he was that did this to her, was a dick, pretty much. But he was also a young guy who is completely hormonally crazy, you know, and all they want to do is, and they want to grab you and they want all that stuff. I get that. I remember that.
Yeah. And that's why you asked her, how are you training your sons to be different?
Yeah. How
he
you
wasn't trained.
No, he wasn't trained. And
he didn't
I was thinking
about respect or consent or spatial issues.
Exactly. And if somebody would have just intervened and said, hey, you can't do this to a person. You're hurting that, I bet you he would have understood that. That's the sense I get.
And rein that fucker in. Rein that. We know what you're feeling. I mean, every man feels it.
Yeah.
But you can't just. And then to do it to 6 other, they find,
See,
he was a predator.
He was, and he was built. I mean, it's a guy. We're kind of built.
We know he's a guy, but he might have been a psychopath. He might have been at least a sociopath.
Maybe.
I mean, I'm a guy, but I never. I mean, I would never do that
either. I don't even go there. I don't think.
Now,
like that,
I take that back. There was some times. I mean, it was consensual, but I would say we're talking 6th, 7th, and 8th, 9th, all the way through high school.
Yeah.
Like I messed around with girls on the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And on summer camps, I went out in the woods and made out. Yeah. It was completely consensual.
Yeah. And that stuff, making out, and that's what I did too. But that's all. I never went any further than that. And
but you're not a bad person, obviously, because you prefaced that by saying, I know some people might think I'm a bad person, but it is hard to hear, especially in light of some of the shit that goes down today, this boys will be boys.
Yeah, you can't.
And that's not what you're saying. No. But in a way, it is, because
boys have that. First of all, they don't have that myelin sheath growing pretty fast up in their head.
We've said it before, that teenagers have a large engine and small brakes.
Yes.
And that's sexually, that's verbally, that's like not
across
knowing.
the board.
Yeah,
right, exactly. So if
control.
somebody would have stepped in, intervened, and said, okay, I got to tell you, man, you're way out of line, and here's why. Maybe he wouldn't have been such a fuck up, and maybe he'd have a different life now. Who knows?
Yeah. Because it doesn't sound like his life is going
No,
well.
It doesn't sound like it. Back with your parents?
Well, here's what I love about what I hear you saying, is that I know he's an asshole.
Yes. Yes.
But he, in some ways, not was a victim, but he was a victim of negligence. Like, there wasn't any, like you said, nobody sat him down and said, this is how you respect a woman. Mm-hmm. You know? So he was a victim of negligence, and it ended up ruining his and many other people's lives.
Yeah. And fortunately for Marie, she was able to
rebound,
bounce back in quite well to a very resilient, very fun, such a sweet woman. You know, you think this is going to be a good mom too. You know, and yes, very powerful, very smart.
The opposite of what she was.
Yes, yeah.
Like under the thumb of his oppression and everything. She's on top of her world. Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Wow.
I'm delighted when I meet powerful women that know themselves and love themselves and are doing the best they can with what they've got and making happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like she's happy.
I love it.
In spite of all these things. I mean, you know, we've had several guests, and maybe it is the fact that they're on the air, and so in a way they know they're going to put on their best.
Yeah, maybe.
But we do see people with just pretty tragic circumstances or dire or difficult. Like, you know, all the allergies and such that her son has. Scraping his own tongue till it bled, because of the reaction
poor
to
little boy. Yeah.
You know, and these are you know, and the price gouging of EpiPens. I mean, so she said it scares me.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this, and it's perilous.
And I would think too. I think you have a point. I mean, we're on a podcast and stuff, and you know, you have to put on the showbiz a little bit.
It's not fake.
It's not. I think maybe at first 2, 3, 4 minutes, maybe everybody's getting kind of comfortable. You know, you're trying to be the best. But then as you go through the story, as you just start talking, as you just start conversing and really sharing, I mean, I think. Very genuine, very genuine, very authentic. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. She really had a lot of good things to say, and a great, powerful, and happy story. Yeah, eventually. Yeah.
So, if you want to listen to her podcast, and it's called My Book of Mormon, and they are currently unpacking. What'd she call it? The creeds and doctrines?
I don't know. The Pearl of Great Price?
Well, they did that one already. That's another book.
Yeah, I don't know.
And but they go through these documents and are just
try to figure them out, essentially.
Yeah. So in a way, you could if you're in like to learning the history of these religions or the ins and outs of their texts. There it is.
There you go. Yeah. So that's a show right there. That was a good one. That was
another one in the can.
Yes, thanks. And we'll do it again next week.
Talk to you then.
Why not?